getting back into the good stuff. A question that people often ask each other among the horror community is, what is your favorite horror movie series? And for me, this would easily be the Evil Dead series. It's only 4 movies long so far, but each film just has a completely different feel to it. And it's the only complete series I've watched in which I've had consistent love for each single film. And if I were to pick a single favorite from the series, it would be the second one, but that's not going to be the subject tonight. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the original and its 2013 remake. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the synopsis of Evil Dead, both of these movies follow a group of friends who go to a trip to a cabin in the woods and soon after make some pretty gruesome discoveries which lead to some pretty gruesome events in which the dead start to take possession of their bodies one by one. So to start off with, each movie has a completely different cast of characters in terms of their personalities. I mean, in terms of the dynamics, each version of the Evil Dead has 2 guys and 3 women, but again, they're about as different from each other as night and day. But both versions do feature a main character as well as a supporting cast, so to start off with, I'm going to talk about the supporting cast. The group of friends in the original Evil Dead are overall a very likable and charming group of people, and they even bring a lot of comedy to the film before the horror begins. Easily one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie is where Ash's girlfriend is attempting to do ESP, and it's one of the funniest scenes in the movie, which then quickly turns into one of the scariest scenes. In the remake, the characters feel a little more dour on the whole, but it is kind of understandable since they're in the middle of a very serious situation, which I'll get more into once I start talking about the main character. But overall, I do think they're fairly serviceable. They are likable enough, and they do show signs of humor when you're first introduced to them, but there's also a lot of awkward exposition between them, which is kind of distracting. Now on to the main characters in each film. These are the ones who easily go through more hell than everyone else. For the original film, you've got the very iconic hero who everyone knows and loves, and that is Ash, played by Bruce Campbell. Although he doesn't really become the Ash that we all know and love until the second movie, which is almost as literal as it is figurative. In the original film, the other characters mostly just call him Ashley, which I didn't even know could be a guy's name until I saw The Evil Dead. But, yeah, in the original, Bruce Campbell just plays him fairly straight as just this very regular guy who falls into a very irregular situation. And as the film drags on, you see more of the dead working through this cabin just to fuck with his mind and drive him insane. In the remake, you've got this female lead character named Mia, who is essentially the reason everyone has gone to the cabin in the first place. She's this junkie who has gone to rehab more than once, and basically her friends have taken her to this isolated cabin so that she can drop the habit cold turkey. And she's also more sensitive to the evil, horrible things which are closing in on the cabin. But as she's trying to communicate what's going on to everyone, they just assume that this is a product of withdrawal, that she's just this crazy druggie who's looking for an excuse to get back to civilization so that she can get her fix once again. And really, the actress gives a commendable performance in this movie. There's this one scene where she's telling her brother why they must leave. She's telling him about this evil that's in the house, and, she's not yelling at him like a crazy person or even talking to him as loudly as I'm talking to the camera right now. She can only communicate to him through a whisper because she is just so completely terrified out of her mind. Now to talk about the horror of The Evil Dead, in which there are a lot of aspects to cover. Now, first of all, there's a scene in both versions involving a tree, which has something in common with The Last House on the Left and Straw Dogs. And for anyone who's looking to misinterpret what I said at the beginning of my Straw Dogs video, I will say that the Evil Dead movies are considerably easier to watch since this type of thing doesn't happen quite as often with trees. I know it's surprising, but it happens even less than shark attacks. And when it comes to the brutality of this particular scene, I would say that both versions even out. They were able to do a lot more in the remake with modern technology and special effects, but the original is still very brutal for how long it lasts. And then when it comes to the atmosphere of each movie, I think that one of the reasons the original scared me so much is because it sets up more of this creepy atmosphere, and it also pulls off a lot more old-fashioned haunted house gags as Ash is wandering through the cabin alone during the final act. In the remake, the atmosphere is simply death and pain, which it establishes quite effectively as it starts off with this very brutal and upsetting intro scene. Also, another one of the reasons that the original scares me is because of the voices of the possessed. A lot of the horror in it comes more from what I hear than what I see, and some people find the voices funny. I find them scary as hell. They do some voice things in the remake as well, but to me they're not quite as effective. And then when it comes to the special effects of The Evil Dead, there are some moments in the original that still hold up. I still think that the red contact lenses of the possessed are pretty scary to look at, and there's a point where somebody gets stabbed in the ankle, which is still very realistic to look at. But overall, the effects are obviously pretty dated. The makeup hangs pretty loosely from the actors' faces, but still, it adds kind of a charming camp value to the film. Also, I'm not sure why one of the characters ends up looking like a dog when he's possessed. Like, he's got this brown face and black nose. I guess he ended up being possessed by a dead dog, which somehow knew how to walk upright in a human body. And then there's a complaint that somebody had regarding the remake. This is a guy who says that he's a fan of the original Evil Dead, and he complained about how gross the gorier moments of the remake are, but I'm not quite sure if he ever watched the ending to the original. It's not exactly easy to sit through if your stomach is easily upset. I think it's pretty obvious that the remake has better special effects. They do use some CGI here and there, and it is blatantly obvious simply for the fact that they couldn't have done certain things without using computers. But for the most part, they do use a lot of practical effects in the remake, which is fairly different for a lot of modern horror movies, and it makes a huge difference in terms of effectiveness. I mean, this marks the third time that I've watched the Evil Dead remake, and there are still several moments that make me cringe in my seat, and I even found myself audibly groaning as I was rewatching this movie. And it does have some pretty gross moments, like that guy I mentioned said. Like, there's a point where somebody gets vomited on a lot, and then there's another pretty gross scene where somebody starts to piss all over themselves as they become possessed. Still, the remake isn't just torture porn. It is still very scary in its own right. It does manage to get some very suspenseful scenes in. Like, there's this one scene in particular which takes place in a bathroom, and I think it's the most effective and terrifying scene in the entire movie. Also, something that I almost forgot to mention in regards to the remake is that it notoriously fakes the audience out a couple of times. There are a couple of moments where you almost think that it's going to end and that the credits are going to start rolling, but then more stuff continues to happen. And there have even been a couple of people who complained about this fact. It's like, oh, the movie could have ended right there and it would have been fine, but then it just kept going. First of all, this movie is only 5 minutes longer than the original Evil Dead, and that movie wasn't even very long to begin with. Secondly, if the film had ended at either of those key moments, which I just mentioned, I would have been severely disappointed. As an Evil Dead fan and as a horror fan in general, the thing for me is that there is a chainsaw which they show on camera untouched, and if the movie had concluded before that chainsaw was put to good use, this film would have been incomplete, plain and simple. And as it is, I walked out of the Evil Dead remake fully satisfied with the way it concluded. In the end, if you say that the original Evil Dead is better, you're not wrong. But if you say that the remake is better, you're still not wrong. They each have their own merits to them as well as their own flaws, and it's all a matter of opinion, really. For me personally, for its entertainment value and more general creep factor to the atmosphere, I'm going to have to put the original Evil Dead just slightly above the remake. And that's really all I have to say for this comparison. I hope y'all have a good one.